So I was up early this morning, and I mean really early. And many of you know how much I love to get up really early. But I was up early this morning collecting what I need to bake something for you. I was up early to make something that may not be the most delicious thing you've ever heard, but it will sustain us. What is it, you ask? That's exactly the question this morning. What is it? Now, I want to give you a little fair warning this morning. I just want to let you know that at the end of worship, there will be a test this morning. So you may want to take notes. You may want to pay special attention, because at the end of worship today, there will be a test. So we're in the lectionary this Sunday. That is a series of recommendations for pastors on which Bible passages to be preaching on and reflecting on. So we'll be in the lectionary for a few weeks, and the lectionary directs us into Exodus chapter 16 today. So Moses and the Israelites are new to the wilderness, and they have escaped from 400 years of slavery. Moses has led them out into the wilderness. God is there guiding them. But there's a lot of problems. And so I want to read to you this morning from Exodus 16, verses 1 to 15. And if you want to follow along in your pew Bible, that's on page 62. Here's what the text says. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin. Now, I know when we read this, we think, well, can't we just get out of the desert of Sin and things would be a whole lot better for us? But in fact, the desert of Sin is a short form of reminding us that we're near Mount Sinai. So they came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, and on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. So the text is placing this within a timeline, and we're a little more than a month removed from leaving Egypt as slaves and becoming God's people in the wilderness. So this is still relatively new for these people, leaving Egypt. Verse 2, it says, in the desert the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt, then we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you've brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Maybe that's more than grumbling. That's some serious complaining. It's also some serious fantasy. I think the Israelites, when they were slaves, probably didn't sit around and have all the food they want to eat, and it was such a great time. They're looking back around at their time of slavery as being one of at least security. They were told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and here's the allotment of food that you get. And they're in the desert wandering around without food to eat, and they're looking back going, well, at least back there we had food to eat. And they're almost thinking of it as better than it even was. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So here we see the beginning of a Sabbath day. On the 6th day, collect twice as much, because on the 7th day, you're not going to collect any. There's a real Sabbath instruction here. So Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us? Moses also said, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You're not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses told Aaron, "Say to the entire Israelite community, 'Come before the Lord before he has heard your grumbling.'" While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in a cloud. The Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread, and then you will know that I am the Lord your God." That evening, quail came and covered the camp. And in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. What is it? That's the question they ask as these flaky white things are on the ground. They're supposed to collect it, and they can make some sort of bread out of it. But they say, "What is it?" In Hebrew, the word manna is derived from the phrase, "What is it?" So when they see these white flakes come down, they say, "Manu, manna, what is it?" So the very word manna means, what is it? It's manna from heaven. It is the bread from heaven, the flakes from which they make bread that sustains them, at least while they're in the wilderness. This is a white, flaky substance of some kind. It doesn't keep very long. You have to collect it and bake it fresh daily. People have tried to answer the question, literally, what is this stuff, for generations. Is it a sap from the tamarisk plant that grows in the region? Is it a kind of lichen, a flaky substance? Is it an insect derivative? People have been studying this issue for a long time, trying to figure out, what is it? And the answer is, we still don't know. We have some guesses. None of the guesses are very good. None of them line up with the description in the text very well. None of the supposed answers provide a sustenance needed for a large group of people over a large period of time. Manna, what is it? We don't really know. The Bible asserts it's a kind of miracle. That's as good an answer as we have. So what about this text? What all is going on here? I want to have us hone in a little bit more on verse 4. Here it is again. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions, whether they will learn to trust me." Manna, what is it? Ultimately, I think the answer to that is, it's a test. Yes, it answers their grumbling. Yes, it gives them some nutrition that they need to sustain themselves. But ultimately, what is it? It's a test. Will they pass? The Hebrew word that's used here in verse 4 does translate well to test, but it also carries another meaning of to prove. So God will test the Israelites in order to prove to them that He is God, and they can prove to God that they have faith and trust in Him. They're being tested. It is a proof of God's presence and of their faith. 3 times in this text, it says, "You will know." They're being tested so that they will know that it is God that is sustaining them. Verse 6, verse 8, verse 12, 3 times, "You will know." God will test them and prove that He is God, and they will have the opportunity to prove their faith. And then in verse 15, the very end of this section. They said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. God is working with these people who've been slaves for 400 years. What do they know about taking care of themselves? Nothing. They know how to do what they're told, do it on time, eat when the food is put in front of them. That's all they know. Do they know God that well? Not yet. God is going to provide for them, free them from from Egypt captivity, lead them into freedom, sustain them, so that they will answer the question, what is this? Who is this? It is God, so they will know. But they don't really know quite yet. The end of verse 15, what is it? For they did not know what it was. The test is before them. Testing, of course, shows what we know and what we don't know. And teachers, you're well aware of this. The test shows what students know, and sometimes it shows what students don't know. That's what's going on with the Israelites here. We're seeing a little bit of what they know and a lot of what they don't know. That's the test that's being put before them. We talk a lot about testing these days. We're talking constantly about testing, it seems. We say, I got a COVID test yesterday. Did you get your COVID test yet? What kind of test did you get? Did you get your test results back? My test was positive. My test was negative. My test was neutral. Test, test, test. That's all we seem to talk about. It's really putting us to the test, I think. Too often, we think of testing as punitive, as judgment. How many times, teachers, did your students, when you told them, we're going to have a test on Friday, they jumped up and cheered, yes, another test. No, I think they did exactly what the Israelites were doing, which is to grumble a little bit, oh, another test. We tend to think of tests as punitive or as an opportunity for the teacher or someone to be judgmental upon us. It's amazing how wonderful tests are when you're completely prepared and you know the material cold. Suddenly it's like, yeah, bring on the test, I'm ready. But we think too often of tests as punitive or judgment. Testing is interrelated with teaching. They're almost interchangeable terms. Testing is teaching and teaching is testing. They go together. My calculus teacher at San Gabriel High School in Southern California, Fred Tellenbach. Fred Tellenbach was a bit of a legend at San Gabriel High School. But I will never forget when he was teaching us derivatives for the first time, Calculus 1. He had us all open our textbooks to a particular page where there was just a list of derivative questions. And he started teaching by saying the answer to number 1 is 15. The answer to number 2 is 42. And he kept going, until a few students in the class were like, oh, I think I get it. And then a few others, he just kept going. And the answer to number 20 is 41. And then suddenly everybody started to catch on. And if somebody wasn't quite getting it, their neighbor would say, look, it's like this. And after just going through one problem after another, all he did was give us the answer. And we kept listening to the answer, looking at the problem, and eventually we figured out what he was teaching us. So teaching and testing are very interrelated. Fred Tellenbach was teaching us about derivatives, testing us, but in a way that guided us. He led us to the answers, motivated us to try and figure out and catch up, because for a while in the class no one knew what was going on. What do you mean that's 20? How could that be 20? But he just kept going. Number 10 is 15. And we kept sort of hearing it and catching on. He led us, motivated us to grow in our math knowledge. but in a way that allowed us to feel like we had taken hold of something. We had accomplished something. We owned a little bit of what we had learned. That's what God's about when it comes to teaching and testing us, leading us, guiding us, motivating us, so that we have some ownership, some participation in our faith growth. That's part of the answer to the question that bothers all of us, which is, why doesn't God just make it obvious? Why all the guiding and the hinting and the leading and the testing? Why not just make it obvious to all of us? Why all the testing? Why does God give them these little moments that lead them to faith? Well, I think Fred Tellenbach gives us a little insight into that. Instead of just telling us, here's how you do a derivative. You take this number and you do it this way, and that's the way you do it. We're going to have a test on Friday. Instead of doing that, he led us, motivated us, guided us, and gave us some ownership in what we've learned. I think that's what God is up to as well. God respects human agency. God has created us and given us a creative and seeking mind. God wants us to use it in our faith growth. God respects human agency. God works with Moses and through Moses to accomplish the freeing of the Israelites. God respects human agency. God created us with a measure of human freedom in order to have authentic relationship with us. In God's sovereign position as creator of heaven and earth, ruler of all things, Lord of all, God has chosen not to create us as puppets, where he holds the strings, or robots that are simply pre-programmed to do what God intends. In God's sovereign position, God gave us a measure of human freedom, a measure of human agency. And so God guides us, leads us, motivates us, but does not force us. So here with manna, God is guiding them, leading them, motivating them, teaching them, and yes, testing them, so that they grow in faith and grow in knowledge of God, so they will know that I am the Lord. God has given them participation in their faith growth, so they have some ownership of their faith journey. That's true for all of us. God gives us participation in our learning, participation and ownership of our knowledge. God tested the Israelites. But is God testing us in the same way? I think in some cases, yes. But as with the Israelite nation, such specific testing from God is rare. God doesn't need to give us specific tests. God's not thinking, let's see, you need to grow in faith today, so how about a car accident on your way home? That'll get your attention, and maybe you'll grow in faith from that. I don't think God needs to give us those kinds of tests. I think the way God has set up life tests us constantly anyway. And so I think God says, well, if you get into an accident, let's work together to try and grow in faith as a result of that. Drive carefully, try to avoid it, but if it happens, we can work together to grow in faith. Life tests us. God doesn't need to put tests in front of you, although God can. Is that really necessary? Or does life test us every day? I think God knows that we are tested constantly. And God is at the ready to guide us, to lead us, to motivate us, to learn more from it, and to grow in faith. So have you gotten all of your faith figured out? Do you feel like you know all about the ways of God and human nature? The Bible makes perfect sense. Your systematic theology is all lined up and works, and you can address any issue. If that's you, well done. Come and help me. Chances are all of us, to one degree or another, don't have things figured out yet. We don't understand all the ways of God. We don't understand our human nature as much as we wish we did. The interchange between God and each of us is still a little bit mysterious, if not a lot mysterious. We still have questions. If you don't have everything all figured out, prepare to be tested. Because there's more to learn. Testing and teaching are interwoven. And if we have anything more to learn about God and ourselves, be prepared to be tested. I told you at the end of worship today there would be a test. And there will be. And there'll be a test tomorrow. And on Tuesday, there'll probably be another test Wednesday. There might be a test every single day. Life has a way of doing that to us. And God's Spirit has a way of saying, okay, here's another opportunity. Here's another chance to grow in our knowledge of God, our relationship with God, our relationship with each other. Here's another test. We don't need to think of those as punitive or judgmental tests. We don't need to be afraid of them, even if we don't know the answer. Because God is trying to help us grow in our knowledge. Remember, at the end of chapter 16, the end of this section in verse 15, they say, manna, what is it? We don't know. That's okay. God's going to teach them and test them. God's going to teach you and me. And we're going to be tested. You're going to be tested at the end of worship, and tomorrow, and the next day. You may not get the best grade, but that's okay. God's Spirit says, let's keep going. There's another one coming down the line. We are tested every day. Are you up to the test? Because it's coming no matter what. Are you ready to be tested? Let's pray together.